name is Sevra Davis, and I'm Director of Architecture, Design and Fashion at the British Council. And in that capacity, I'm also Commissioner of the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in the architecture years. As Commissioner of the British Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale, my role is to come up with the brief of what we will present in the British Pavilion every other year, and then appoint the creative team and then work with them over the course of around 18 months to develop and deliver the exhibition. The element of repair came out of the relationship between the UK and Kenya. So the brief for 2025 to the creative teams, the brief that I wrote for the British Pavilion was to say, what does it look like if we in the British Pavilion don't just showcase the best of what the UK has to offer in terms of architectural talent and architectural thinking, but actually present a collaboration as the center of the sort of what the exhibition and what the pavilion is. So, and that's when you get into the sort of subject of repair, which is that repair relates to repairing relationships, repairing our relationship between people, between nations, between cultures, but also then, of course, our relationship, repairing our human relationship to architecture as well. And so I think what's so exciting and compelling about this particular British Pavilion is the starting point being a relationship between the UK and Kenya, which has historically been very, very difficult and very, very painful and based on sort of colonial systems. But looking at that in a sort of new 21st century sense, saying, what does it look like if the UK actually acknowledges its wide relationships with the rest of the world, and in this case, Kenya, and looks at what does repairing that relationship look like, and then how does that manifest through our relationship with architecture and the way that we need to repair that. As a representative of the British Council, we are a cultural relations organization. So our, in some ways, you could say, you can sum up what we try to do very simply, which is that we try to create positive connections between the UK and other places around the world. We, as an organization, it was born out of a different time, obviously, and when there were different and more colonial relationships in place between the UK and other countries. And I think what is sort of where we are now, if you also look at institutions like the Biennale themselves, which also have a number of pavilions, freestanding buildings, which all have the name of a country on the front, that is also from a different age. And so as a commissioner of a national pavilion, what role do we take in the 21st century when we want to have a different relationship with the rest of the world? We're also, as you will hear this many times, we're all facing challenges that require transnational cooperation and collaboration. As a cultural relations organization, as a representative of that, I see my role as really trying to think about what does that future look like, and how do we acknowledge that very, very painful relationships have had in the past, but also that we have to look to a more positive future. Obviously, the whole point of this is around new relationships, better, more equitable relationships, and also optimism that we can sort of do this together through collaboration. And so I feel very, very strongly about that. I wouldn't have written a brief that put collaboration at the heart of it if I didn't actually think that was the way forward. Specific to this pavilion, it's sort of saying, let's not shy away from really, really difficult pasts, but also kind of use our creativity and our imagination and our optimism to put forward a new proposal. And it's very layered, as you will know. The exhibition is ultimately about our relationship, architecture's relationship to the earth, and how architects, particularly in the global north, have sort of, developed an architecture that is extractive, both in terms of materiality, but also in terms of relationships. And sort of how do you break that through? If we have a platform like the British Pavilion at the Biennale, how can we actually use that to say something about the UK's connections to the rest of the world, and demonstrate sort of generosity and a sense that we need a new relationship. My role as commissioner is to ensure that the exhibition on the whole has a clear narrative, and that is saying something that we feel that the UK can and should be saying to the rest of the world about about the UK, but also about, then in this case, architecture. Part of the commissioning of the British Pavilion is also to place, this is an important point, is to put faith in the teams that you've appointed at a very early stage, and to work with them to develop a narrative, but not to kind of be present in every single conversation about what every single object might be trying to do. I think the fact that the British Council is a cultural relations organization that understands that collaboration and connection is at the heart of everything we do, that helps. And it's sort of, I didn't face any, when sort of presenting this as my idea for what we would do for 2025, I didn't face any internal challenges around doing that. Because of being able to talk about the importance of connection. This was a radical, but also a sort of much needed way of doing that, using the platform of the pavilion and the Biennale. It's my view that we have to sort of push the boundaries of things like the Biennale and the National Pavilion structure, and a place like the UK is so connected to the rest of the world, and there are difficult reasons for that connection, but let's think about what does that mean going forward. It wasn't about inviting Kenya or another country into the British Pavilion and saying, take it over and kind of we give it to you. It was about saying, what does it look like when we collaborate as architects, creative thinkers from two different, cultures, having had a difficult relationship in the past? What does that actually push forward? I think it has inspired many people to sort of think differently about what the pavilions can be and what the exhibitions can be. I think it has opened up conversations around the role of architecture and connection to the earth, and to literally to the earth, to geology, in a really powerful, but also sort of subtle way. So I'm hopeful that we will see the exhibition have a sort of life beyond the British Pavilion. To be really honest, I think every national pavilion hopes that their exhibition each year will have some sort of life, whether it's back in the sort of home country or somewhere else. And we're currently working on that, and you'll hear that if you haven't from Kabage, Stella, Catherine, and Owen already. We're sort of hopeful that there might be some iterations of the exhibition in other places after it closes in Venice. But I think the bigger point is, how does this change kind of thinking in architecture, particularly sort of shining a light on extractive processes, and how can we think more about architecture's connection to the earth. So that's what I hope for. And then there's the bigger question about, what does having opened up this collaboration between the UK and Kenya mean for, future UK-Kenya relations, but also future sort of British Pavilion exhibitions. So if I'm really honest, I'm currently thinking all of that over in terms of what does it mean for the British Pavilion 2027, and how do we build on what's happened this year, and sort of this sort of radical rethink of what you present in the British Pavilion, but also not kind of wanting to kind of get stuck in a mold, which is like, you just pick a country kind of every year and collaborate with them. Is sort of seeing this as a sort of moment and a marker of doing things differently in the British Pavilion, but not actually acknowledging everything, not sort of disregarding everything that's gone before it. I think our 2021 pavilion and I think our 2023 pavilion have also been building up to this point in a way. And so part of me is also thinking all of this over, because you have to think about kind of the where you are in the world at the moment. And there's a funny thing with being a commissioner, you have to think 2 years out. So I have to almost sort of predict the future of, like, what does the world need us to say about, from the UK perspective, but also architecture in 2 years' time.